would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Hi, Simon. My name's Justin Wood. Thanks for having me on, first of all. I appreciate it. Again, my name's Justin Wood. I'm an artist out of New Jersey in the States. I'm a still life painter, and I studied at Grand Central Atelier under Jacob Collins, and now that was in New York City, and now I'm out in Jersey, just painting in my studio.
Excellent. Well, I actually, in the last season, this is season 5 of the podcast. In season 4, I interviewed someone who went to Grand Central Atelier, and you may know him. I'm not sure. It's Devon Cecil Wishing. Do you know Devon?
Oh, I know Devin. I know Devin very well, and him and I actually co-taught a class together for several years.
Fantastic. Yeah. I thought I could see a relation in your work, as in, they come from the same world. Um, so when I read your bio, I saw that it was Grand Central Atelier, and I thought, oh, lovely. You may know him. Yeah. So,
Yeah, he's a really nice guy and a really good painter and great
yeah.
teacher also.
Well, you both have this fantastic work, and I really appreciate your approach. I was wondering because it seems to be a key kind of tenet of the school. I don't know if that's the right word, but if you'd be able to talk about the importance of drawing and painting from life.
Yes, that is kind of the real, um, I guess, the mantra of the school. It's very much a from life approach, and I suppose the reason behind that is it's an effort to sort of recreate the conditions that those old academies and ateliers worked under. Um, that some there's I don't feel entirely able to articulate what makes the from life experience kind of special and valuable, but there is something about that direct interaction with your subject matter that I do think gives you an opportunity to understand it in a really kind of deep, sort of directly connected sort of way, and in a world where technology is becoming more and more powerful and the tools are becoming so effective at helping artists create images that I think it can become easy to be disconnected from those basic skill sets that I think are probably the easiest to develop when you're just drawing and painting from life. And two, also learning when you're working from life, it's you have to sort of take the real world, the real three-dimensional world, and figure out how to sort of translate that onto a two-dimensional surface. And in order to do that, you have to sort of understand why the world looks the way it does, and then how to literally, like quite literally, translate that into a slightly different language, because paint has certain limitations um, that kind of prevent you from being able to kind of directly copy nature in this one-to-one sort of way. That's why I say it's a translation ultimately. And if you're using something like a photograph or some other technology, it greatly aids in that translation process. Whereas if you're not relying on the photograph or using tools like optics and whatnot, you kind of have to figure out how to do that on your own. Um, that said, I kind of want to make it clear that I'm not saying one approach is better than another. I think it's very much goal dependent, and I think I've come to the sort of position that a good painting is a good painting, and I think it matters a little. I'm not sure it entirely matters how it's made, and it's more of like paintings are well made or they're not well made, and it'll make you feel something or it doesn't make you feel something. And I think it's more of the final product that probably matters the most. However, I do think process is important, and it does the our studio practices does affect ultimately kind of how the thing turns out. But it's always an interesting topic at the school for discussion and to think about of like of just what not so much what's the right way to work, but what's the best way to work in order to yield the result that you're going for. And people have different opinions on that and different takes, and it's a fun, an interesting thing to talk about. It's also can be uh, a difficult thing to talk about. Um, but again, I've been in different places with that over time, and I think where I'm at today is very much like, is the painting good or is it not good? And of course, opinions, what the criteria that we bring to judge a painting is not going to be the same from one person to the next. But um, I would not want to look at a painting, have an interaction or a sort of react to it in a certain way, and then all of a sudden find out later, like, oh, this was made in that sort of way. And then I'm like, wait a sec, I shouldn't like that anymore. I mean, if you find yourself in a position like that, there's probably, I would say that you should I would want to re-examine the way I'm, the sort of my sort of criteria for judging things. Again, I think it either makes you feel something or it doesn't. And it's kind of, I think it can be that simple.
Yeah. Well, drawing from life and painting from life, I mean, compared to a photograph, life is inherently temporal. So it's moving in, the light moves, the air moves, the elements affect everything. So drawing from life can mean something quite loose and inaccurate. How is it you've been able to hone this knowledge and accuracy of anatomy and form and tone when you're faced with things face to face in person, as opposed to a frozen studying an image?
Um, yeah, that is one of the challenges of working from life, because life generally doesn't sit still for you. Different genres, that sort of factor plays to different degrees depending on genre. Like, of course, if you're a landscape painter outside and the sun's moving across the sky and the clouds are moving, those conditions are so difficult and challenging to adapt to, because really the target is moving really fast. And a figure too, like no, when you're drawing the figure, no figure is a statue. They're moving and shifting, and even with still life painting, even though it's a much more of a still sort of situation generally, still when you're painting produce, for example, or leaves or stems, those don't stay put, they change. So understanding how to, if things are changing and they don't just stay in one spot for you, you have to bring in alternative ways of making decisions or thinking about those things in order to compensate for the fact that they are no longer what they were when you started the painting. Ways to manage that are with making studies. You can individually study that thing before, in isolation, before it's in the painting. Therefore, you kind of don't have to worry about painting all these other things. While you're trying to paint that, you can just sort of figure that thing out first, and then you can kind of take that study and almost like kind of in the painting sense, almost Photoshop it into your scene. That's how in the old days they would do it. For different reasons. One was they didn't have access, like if we're talking 17th century Dutch still life painters, they didn't have access to all the things that we take for granted today. You can go to the food store and get essentially whatever we want. Back then, it wasn't the case. Lemons, for example, were a luxury item that had to be imported from different places in the world. And if you had a lemon in the Netherlands in the 17th century, that was a status symbol. That meant you're doing pretty good in life. And that's one of the reasons you see them in those paintings all the time, is because it was a symbol of affluence and luxury. And when you're painting a lemon, especially if you peel it, that peel is going to change. So very often they were lucky enough, the artist was lucky enough to get their hands on a lemon. So instead of doing what most modern artists do, they just put the lemon in their painting, they paint it, and then that lemon's gone. It's just in that painting. They would make a little independent study of that, and they would keep that study, and then they would actually reuse and recycle it. And there's an interesting book that I have that kind of gave me kind of some insight into that process or means of dealing with the fleeting nature of things, and also the kind of the how things could also be inaccessible to varying degrees. They would an artist, Simon Ludechois, was a Dutch 17th century artist. He in this book that I have of his, the same orange is painted 6 times. It appears in 6 different paintings, but it's the same orange with the same identical leaf sort of arrangement. And he plugged it into 6 different paintings. And what that tells me is that he had most likely had a study, a separate painted study of that orange. At some point, he got that physical orange, made a study of it, kept that study as reference, so that when he needed an orange for a painting, he couldn't necessarily go, like, we shouldn't assume that he could just go to the store and get one. So he just opened his file of imagery, and it's like, okay, here's my orange. I'm going to put that in there. And then he was able to just sort of fit it into that little world that he created. And what's interesting is that he would make little changes to the orange in order to be able for it to fit in the different environments, because it's not like it's going to be a one size fits all thing. When you put that orange on a metal pewter plate, the light's going to hit the pewter, and it's so reflective, it's going to bounce into the underside of the orange and illuminate the underside of the orange. So in one of the paintings, he kind of created this bounce light effect on the underside of the orange. And then in other ones, that same effect's not there because he put the orange in a different environment. So I think when you're really forced to only work from life, and also times where you kind of can't work from life in as a direct sort of way, it forces this kind of conceptual part of your brain to develop in a way where it might not otherwise. And there's an empowering thing that happens from that, which lets you kind of be more in control of the little worlds that you build, because you have a deeper understanding of why things are the way that they are. Instead of being this sort of more just sort of a good observational person who can be like, oh, I see this color there, I see that. And they're just more of a moment to moment reacting, instead of this more a deeper conceptual sort of thing where they don't need to have the literal thing in front of them all the time. They can sort of, they're a little bit more less rigid, and they have this ability to kind of, I don't know how to say it in a better way, but so I'll just kind of go back to being they just had the ability to sort of build a world in this sort of, in a way that I think a lot of modern artists don't, because we haven't developed that muscle in the way that they did. And it came out of necessity. I think if artists back then had the same stuff we had, then they would be more like us. So it's an interesting thing to try to figure out the conditions that they were working under, because it affected the way that ultimately those paintings looked. And the same is true with a lobster. There's the same thing with, in the same book, there's images with the same lobster, even down to the little barnacles on the shell. It's the same lobster. And what's interesting about this is the same lobster, but in 4 different artists' paintings. So it wasn't just the same artist painting the same lobster over and over again. He was sharing his image with his friends and being like, hey, hey, whatever, I know that you got that lobster. I got this lobster commission. Can I borrow your lobster reference? And I'll let you have my, they traded images and they shared with each other. And that's another interesting insight because it gives us, it shows us that they had a different attitude about sort of originality and sort of, uh, um, like if someone did that today, we would say that that's wrong to do. We would say like, oh, you're plagiarizing, you're stealing. But they didn't look at it like that. They're just like it's a it's a means to an end. And I think if there was enough other sort of differences in the painting, it was its own thing, and it was okay if like, oh, it's the same lobsters. But it's just another interesting insight into how those artists worked. And a lot of how I want to work is based off, like, I really love those old paintings so much. And I like what I want to make my paintings kind of look like that. So it's trying to figure out how they worked, and what guided their practice. But that book in particular was very, I feel like I learned so much from just that one book, just from seeing some just simple images like that, where you see them reusing the same thing.
So do you yourself have books that you're developing in a similar way with references that you can refer to were you to have something which is fleeting in the moment?
No, because I don't need to. I can always go buy a new lemon. It's harder to work that way. Um, and if I didn't have to do it, I wouldn't. So I feel like I think I think it's interesting to learn about those things, and but I feel like they only did it because they had to do it. And if like Peter didn't have to borrow that image of the lobster from whoever his buddy was, then he wouldn't have. So I think it was just born out of necessity more than anything. And but again, I think it's good to be aware of that because again, it's how those pictures were made. But I think ultimately, I don't want to make pictures exactly how they made pictures because it's like I'm trying more and more. I think I used to be a little more, well, I know I used to be a lot more sort of like clinging to that example and trying to sort of more replicate it in this really kind of almost trying to do what they were doing. And you hear a lot of like, you got to be in your time, you got to be in your moment, you can't repeat that. And I feel like I've kind of come around to that idea a lot more over the years. So I'm more kind of embracing kind of where we're at now and trying to be like, okay, how can I connect to that world that I really like and am and inspired by, but also kind of maybe be also kind of a little more here and now, or take this or tap into the spirit that exists in those paintings, but try to find what's interesting and special here and now, and trying to do the same thing, but only instead of using a 17th century Romer goblet sort of thing, I use a cup that we would actually use because what I think one of the goals that I think I have for myself is trying to look around and try to notice things that are here and now, and trying to sort of show what's maybe special about that, or trying to find a way to elevate that in a way. And I think that's something that like good artists do. They see things around them every day, and for some reason, there's something special about their ability to notice that, and then take that um, as a jumping off point to make something from that, and it's a reaction to their environment, and and a good artist will take that and then show something special about that. And it can be something kind of mundane that no one else would notice. And somehow their spin on it, or the way that they kind of, it comes back out of them, all of a sudden it became something special. And then we can kind of see it in a new way. Um, Musicians do that all the time with like lyrics. They'll hear a conversation in some public space, and just some offhand remark or something, and there's something in that that they recognize that no one else would have, and then they can go and put that into a song, and then all of a sudden it's this song, and then all of a sudden they're able to make everyone else see what was special that in only in that moment they could see. I don't know if I'm explaining what I'm trying to very well, but it's but it is, whether I am or not, that's kind of something I'm thinking a lot about with picture making recently.
Yeah, no, I thought that was very articulate, and it makes me now question whether or not when you have this keen, well, what the appearance of precision, I assume, and obviously a lot of knowledge and kind of love has gone into learning and describing these different subjects. Is there any point where you have space for invention inside of the work that you create?
Yes, and I find myself doing that more and more. However, it's probably not going to be in a way that a lot of people would notice unless they were in the studio with me and they saw what my setup was and then what my painting was. I think a lot of times if you just see my painting, you'll be like, oh, well, that probably looks just like the thing that he was looking at when he painted it. But more and more, I'm finding myself wanting to, and also I think able to, take what's in front of me and then identify what I like about it, identify what I don't like about it, and then ultimately edit the scene to make it more how I want it to be instead of how it just happens to be. For example, and this is something that I've just this isn't some I of course have not just this isn't a new idea at all or something that I only do. This is something that artists have done forever. And that's kind of goes into what I was talking about before, how they can just see something in life and then see this special little thing in there and then take that and then transform it into something even more sort of special. So um, an example of doing that, even though it's a small example, it's still an example nonetheless. Hopefully this makes sense to a larger audience, but in a still life scene, usually you have a table and there's some kind of background, whether it's a wall or just a deeper ambiguous space. And then on the table, there's stuff on the table. So usually there's a front edge of the table you see, and then there's a back edge of the table. Like a little convention or a little sort of a trick or whatever you want to call it, a deviation from the reality that you'll notice artists do is on that back edge, if you want to call it, let's call it the horizon line on the table. They will often soften the edge and drop the contrast between the edge of the table and the background. And that's not something I noticed for kind of a long time. I had to sort of make a lot of still lifes before I started to become sort of sensitive to that choice. And ultimately what it does is it controls the viewer's experience by redirecting attention to a more important area. So by so when a good artist understands why someone will look one place versus another, and there's different variables that contribute to that. One of them is contrast and edges. Biologically, our eyes are drawn to sharp edges that have high contrast, and our eye will be less drawn to an area that has low contrast with sort of a soft, diffuse sort of boundary. So if you understand a principle like that, you can use that to your advantage to, again, control viewer experience and be like, okay, this is an important area of the picture that I want to have a primary part of the picture that I want the viewer to really sort of look at before they look at other things, or to just focus on. So what happens though if I have an important sort of focal point in the main part of the picture that has a certain degree of sharpness and contrast, but then there's this part in the background that's just the table edge that also has an equal degree of contrast and sharpness. Well, then those two areas can sort of maybe fight for attention, and they might be sort of there might lack this sort of harmony and this sort of hierarchy of importance within the picture. So artists have learned over time to sort of identify those sorts of situations and then to change them in order to sort of prioritize what's important and to sort of downplay the secondary things. So again, an example of that is what you'll notice in a lot of paintings from the Dutch to through Chardin did this. Chardin was a big kind of, you can really see it in his paintings where he'll almost lose that back edge. It almost just gets lost into the background. And that's a very deliberate choice. And again, it's because he doesn't want you to look there. It's an unimportant area. Yes, he has to sort of build the table so it's a real space, but he's going to largely downplay that little situation to sort of make you so you don't get lost over there, or you don't spend time there that should be spent somewhere else. And I think that comes from like a landscape sort of thing. It also kind of can also enhance the sense of depth and space, because thinking when we're outside looking at a big view, like mountains in the background or something, the more things recede into the background, the further they are from us, the softer those edges and boundaries will be, and the less contrast those boundaries will have due to all the atmosphere between us and those things. So you can take that same principle and apply it to still life, even though the depth in still life is comparatively negligible. But you can still achieve the same effect of enhancing depth and spatial kind of a spatial sense by exaggerating those principles. So one, it can enhance depth, but two, it can also redirect viewer attention and focus. Another example of that is within grapes. I read in an excerpt from Jan Davids de Heem, another 17th century Dutch still life painter. He wrote a painting manual, and he talked about how to create abundance in a picture, and he used grapes as an example. And he said to paint the grapes in the front of the bunch with a greater value range and with really kind of a crisper edges and whatnot, but let the grapes in the background be painted flatter and with softer edges, and this will enhance the sense of abundance. And I think it's totally true. And when you go and start looking at those paintings with that sort of thing in your mind, you start to notice that. And whether it's a back table edge or like a pile of produce, you can play and edit the realities in order to enhance something or play it up. And that's a fun thing to do. And it's not limited to those examples. It can happen everywhere. And I feel like the more I paint, the more experience I accumulate, the more sensitive I get to recognizing those opportunities and then doing something about it with the paint. And that is, whether or not I'm doing it well or not is a matter of opinion. And I try not to really judge myself very much. But when it's done well, whether it's by me or let's just say Peter Claes, when he does that well, it elevates the thing, I think, above the reality. Above it goes beyond the real, and it goes somewhere above that, and it's better than real, kind of. It's become idealized in a sense, and I think a good artist understands the rules and then ultimately knows how to bend those rules and to sort of stretch things and alter the reality to create a better version of it.
We have been working on something in the background.
We've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
We have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. For anyone who's listening, behind you there is a large painting with what I assume is about 30 or so subjects on the picture plane. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because of, you mentioned composition. And I do wonder how you develop pieces like this if it's not, I mean, I don't know if you do develop it in a sketchbook or if you go straight to the canvas. Can you talk about how you would approach this piece behind you? How did you do that?
So this is a big text. I'll get out of the way for a second. It's a recent painting that's I just finished. It's still drying. It's not varnished yet, but
amazing piece.
Thank you. I kind of love animals and nature, and over the years I've accumulated this taxidermy and skull collection, and I've been wanting to just to sort of do a more ambitious, larger painting with all that stuff. And the way I approach it is honestly the same way I approach like a small little fruit still life. It's sort of, first, I guess it starts with the subject matter. What do I want to paint? So I can't just say, oh, it's gonna. I can't just like write out a list of everything I want to paint. It happens more gradually and in a sort of a less sort of foreseen sort of way. But I spent, gosh, it started with knowing like, so in general, I use a lot of triangular compositions. And that framework it's just another thing that I've noticed in old paintings that was been used and used over and over again. And I think a triangular format is a great compositional armature. I think it's kind of inexhaustible. And if you start looking at paintings, old or particularly old, I like to talk more about old paintings. You see that, whether it's figurative art, still life, landscape, you see that used over and over again to many varying degrees by all different sorts of artists. And I don't know exactly why it seems to work. I think there's something very stable about that shape that we're somehow unconsciously sympathetic to. It's like we make habitat, like houses have that shape. There's something just strong and stable about it. And I think without understanding like the brain science behind it, I think we like seeing things arranged in that way. So I almost always will do some variation on a triangle. And I want to arrange things in such a way where you put a bunch of different things in a scene together, but they somehow are placed in a way where they kind of combine to form some larger unit or harmonious kind of whole. And there's different ways you can do that. I think overlaps can, you can create a triangular composition without overlaps, but I think overlapping is a good way to create connection. because you don't want everything to be too individually sort of spaced and sort of too disconnected. So overlapping is a good way to kind of take a bunch of individual units to combine to form some larger thing. And but it started with kind of the big pieces, and it usually does. You start with the big, you kind of move the big furniture into the room, you kind of get that situation, you get that stuff situated, and then you start to figure out where the smaller stuff goes, and then you start to kind of puzzle piece it together. And that's essentially kind of how it developed. It began with, like, I knew I wanted to have some stuff on the wall, and I knew I wanted some stuff on like a table, and I knew I had some of the bigger stuff up front on the ground. So I already had a sense of like where the big bear would have to be, and where the coyote and the bobcat and some of that stuff would have to be. I knew it had to be down low, and also being bigger, I wanted it to be down low. You want the big stuff on the bottom, and then you get progressively smaller as you go up, so it feels like it's stable and strong. It's not this weird top heavy thing that's going to fall over. So it starts with kind of just moving in those big pieces, and then you kind of go to the next biggest pieces, and then you try to fill in gaps, and then you start to move things. It was kind of over a week of it was really just a week of me moving things around. And in the beginning, things move, like you make kind of big adjustments and this and that. But as the week went through, I found myself making smaller and smaller adjustments, and the changes became subtler, and then eventually you just sort of arrive at something that you think you like. And then after that, I'll make a study, and whether it's this animal painting or a regular sort of painting I make, that's kind of the process. It begins with spending time arranging things and trying to more and more, I'm trying to take more time in that stage to try to live with the setup longer. My younger self was a lot more like impetuous and just sort of, I just wanted to paint, I wanted to produce. So I was a little bit too eager and a little less disciplined. So I ended up just sort of churning this stuff out. And then hindsight would kind of kick in after the fact, being like, oh man, look at that. If I only just sort of moved that thing over, or I added something here, or sometimes not make the painting altogether. That's kind of taught me to be a little, sort of slow down a little bit more in this sort of design phase, to live with it a little more before I commit to it. And I feel like that's given me more of an opportunity to sort of find something better in there. I think of like composing as like a discovery. That thing is down in the ground there somewhere, and you just have to spend a certain amount of time looking for it. And the less experienced artists will tend to sort of not dig very deep. Their first arrangement is like, they kind of tend to go with their first arrangement. Instead of being like, okay, this is my first idea, but you know what? The first idea is usually not the best idea. Let me dig a little deeper and see if I can find something better. And so I feel like I've learned how to spend more time digging and to sort of just be more patient, really. Because the patience is what allows you to sort of get more, to sort of see the thing for more of what it is. Because it's easy to fall in love with stuff. And then you become sort of irrational, and you lose a lot of objectivity. So if you kind of live with it a little bit longer, that honeymoon phase kind of dies off, and then you're left like, well, is there really something worth pursuing here? And sometimes I find no, and it's like, no, I either abandon this, or it's not, there's something here, but I'm not developing it enough to make a painting yet. So I really love that stage more and more, and I'm finding it the hardest, like composing, to be like the hardest stage now, and it's not something that gets enough attention earlier on in everyone's careers, and I think rightly so, because in the beginning you just have to learn how to paint and draw. So much of your time and energy is just going into the handcraft of the technical stuff of understanding, learning how to get the right color in the right spot. But at a certain point, you gain a sort of aptitude and abilities to do that pretty well, and then you kind of get some space freed up in your brain to think about the next thing. And kind of the last frontier, I think, is or the last consideration is composition, and it's um, uh, something I really love doing that in a way that I haven't before. But further with process, once I've sort of figured out, like I think I'm ready to sort of move forward, then I'll usually execute a study. And making that little mini version of it is really the easiest way to sort of know or predict how that will look as a painting, because you can like sit in front of the setup, you can even snap a picture of it and crop it to sort of get a sense of how it would look as a painting. But I find that it's not until you actually make a little painting that you really know as well as you'll be able to sort of know how it's going to actually be as a painting. So after I make the study, then I'll be like, oh, wait a second, this doesn't work, or that doesn't work, or I need to do this or that, or I'll be like, okay, no, this is checking out. This feels good. I'm ready to actually make the thing now.
It's incredible. Sorry, please continue.
I was going to say one more thing about composition. In with regards to the triangle, it's also like working in addition to like that larger shape I like to create. I try to avoid it. I want to create variety within that shape, because if the triangle is too rigid or it's too obvious and heavy-handed, that'll feel gross. Because I like the organization and the solidity and the stability of the triangle, but I don't want to scream triangle. I would rather whisper than yell if I'm able to, and be a little subtler than too obvious. So to sort of, I think, pull that off, you have to sort of find this way to simultaneously make it feel organized and deliberate while also maintaining a certain amount of spontaneity and candidness and like nonchalance to it. It should feel like it almost just happened. And that's a hard thing. It's really hard to make it look kind of random, but also like good. Because usually what can be nice about random is that sort of naturalism that you get with randomness. But a lot of times, more often than not, if you just put a random thing up there, it won't be composed well. So it's trying to deliberately look random or almost like naturalistic in a sense, where it's actually not. It's all very deliberated over, and everything is so consciously chosen. And scale too, variety of scale. It's like I've learned, like, you need big things, you need medium things, and you need small things. If it's all just one or the other, it's gonna lack something. So it's like, if you look at an old still life painting like a Chardin or a Dutch still life, you will notice that variety of scale. You'll see bigger things all the way down to the medium things, and then the small little place fillers and just little gap fillers and placeholders and stuff. It's not easy to go that deep into a picture. It's so easy to take stuff for granted when you see a master do it, because masters always make whatever they're doing look easy, whether it's sports or music or painting. They make things seem so obvious, like, oh, well, of course that's what you do. But then when you go to try to do it yourself, you're like, I can't even come close to this. So you gain an appreciation for just how difficult what they're doing is. It's just that effortlessness, that just it's an automatic. They are unconsciously automatic with how they can do things. It just happens naturally because it's become second nature to them, and that's, I think, what mastery is. So it's, I think, even though composition is this kind of very kind of mysterious and kind of ambiguous thing, when you really kind of, if you look at like enough paintings you will start to notice patterns and themes and reoccurring sorts of things. And that's good because you realize you don't have to reinvent the wheel every painting that you create. You can reuse and recycle frameworks and armatures. As long and because you're plugging in different stuff, it's going to be different. And a triangle can come in every different. Like look at Peter Clay's painting. Sometimes his triangle is more a central equilateral triangle. Sometimes it's very offset, where it's off to one side. There's so many variations on the triangle where it seems like it's this, well, a triangle, that's a boring, rigid thing. You're going to run out of ideas soon, sooner or later. But I don't think that's the case. I think it's an inexhaustible format. And when you think about all the different objects you can paint and all the different little variations on that shape, it's to me, it's like you can spend your lifetime just staying within that model.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's a wonderful painting where the negative space is really well utilized with texture and dark and shadows, as well as the relation between the objects, which is just fascinating. It looks as though it has a great narrative drive to it as well as a piece. So yeah, it's fantastic work, well executed. I mean, beautifully made. And I'm curious as well about your color palette, because they're all very muted colors and yet they don't lack vibrancy. So do you have a set palette that you use? And if so, could you take us through the colors on your palette, please?
I do not have a set palette. I sort of come at color from kind of a pragmatic sort of approach where it's like I only put out the colors that I think I need to paint whatever the thing that I'm painting that day is. So if I'm painting like a skull, I ask myself, what colors do I need in order to paint that, in order to essentially match those colors? And I'll be like, okay, for example, if I were to paint a skull, usually all I need is white, yellow ochre, an earth red, like a Venetian red, raw lumber, and black. I don't need a blue. There's no real blue in skulls, and if it looks blue, it's probably just more of a gray or neutral. So I can hit that with black. Just I can create like a gray essentially. So really, I'm more of a limited palette sort of person. I would rather. I feel like kind of sometimes I would, if I had a million colors on my palette, I would feel overwhelmed by too many choices. So I'm more like the type would be like, I don't need three blues. I just give me one blue. But if the blue I have isn't able to mix the color that I'm trying to, then I'm like, okay, I need a different blue. So it's just what do I need to hit the colors that I'm going to paint today, and so I just whatever I think I need, that's what I put out that day. That said, there are colors I use more often than not, and if I had to say that I had a standard palette, which I wouldn't, but what's almost always on my palette, white, yellow ochre, earth red. I use alizarin all the time. I use cad red quite a bit. Ultramarine blue, raw lumber, and black. I don't really use. I have a green, but I don't. A lot of times I'll just, if I'm painting, a lot of the greens I paint are kind of low chroma greens, so I can just mix ultramarine blue and yellow ochre to get a green. But if I need to sort of boost the chroma, I have a green that I don't even remember what it's called. It's essentially just a high chroma green, similar to a cad green, but it's I don't think it's a cad green. It's like a different kind. But yeah, I don't have. To me, color is just a means to an end, and I don't have any sort of preferences necessarily or prejudices. It's just what do I need to sort of achieve whatever I'm going for, and I don't really deviate very far from what the true colors are in my subject. I stick pretty close to what's in front of me. So I'm not like pushing like like Rubens, for example, would push halftones really blue and then push like the lighter parts of the flesh really pink. Like it was a deliberate exaggeration. I don't really do that so much. Sometimes I'll do it a little bit, like with metal. Maybe I'll put in a little bit of a note of blue there near a highlight or something, even though it's not actually blue. But I don't find myself very adventurous with color in that sense.
So how about the white? Is it always titanium white, or have you experimented with others?
I don't use titanium white. I only use lead white, and the white I've been using recently is Natural Pigments Flemish white. The reason I like that is because it's a lead white. Probably most of the reason I like lead white is it's a historical white. All the artists that I love, Rembrandt, all those Dutch guys, they all used lead white, so that's kind of probably mostly why I use it. But also I like the properties of it too. It dries fast compared to titanium white. It's more translucent or more transparent. And I like too the consistency of the Flemish. This particular white, it has a long, stringy kind of quality instead of a short butter. Most tube paint is short and buttery, whereas but paint can also be long and kind of gooey and stringy, or what they call like legs, where instead of like if you take some of the paint and you pull it apart, instead of just breaking apart immediately like short buttery paint will, a longer paint will sort of want to stick together long. So you get these long sort of gooey strands, and that has a certain look on the canvas that I like. And a lot of the Dutch painters were using a white that had a similar kind of, I think, property to it. Also, you can add stand oil to kind of increase that quality. Stand oil makes things, being so viscous and gooey like that, it can give your paints more of that property. And so for my impastos and lights, I will very often use mix some stand oil into that too, because I like that texture, that sort of gooey but also self-leveling sort of texture that it gives the paint.
Mm. And I'm assuming, and perhaps wrongly, that it's all very thin. You don't build up very thick layers of paint. Is that correct, or do you actually allow yourself to really have thicker layers?
I do vary the application. And not to, if we're really looking at the real big sort of picture, in the scheme of things, I'm not a super thick painter. However, I do build up paint to, a pretty good degree in my lights. I do like to impasto, um, and I do like to keep my darks thin. Usually it's like I keep shadows on the thinner side and then lights on the thicker side. And I like that sort of variation. Again, it's just a classical sort of traditional sort of thing. Thin, transparent shadows, comparatively thicker, more opaque lights. And it's paint application is very interesting. It's something I really am interested in. The technique aspect of it, and it's interesting to kind of think about different examples of artists that sort of play with that to different degrees. You think about like a Rembrandt and a Velasquez. They really liked their impastos, and they would keep their shadows quite thin, halftones quite thin, and really build up their lights. Whereas like an Angres or Ang or whatever, I don't know how to say it, and a Holbein, they were much more on the thinner side of paint application. However, even when you look at Holbein and Ang, you still see comparatively thicker lights and sort of slightly looser accents. It's just the difference between their lights and their darks in terms of paint application is it's much less of a difference between that and versus like a Rembrandt and a Velasquez, where their impastos were super thick and their shadows super thin, whereas an Ang, where his impastos were not super thick, just opaque, I would say. Maybe a little bit thicker than opaque, and same thing with Holbein, but also having thinner shadows. So whether you're kind of on the tighter thinner side, I still think, or the sort of the looser, sort of more, maybe a little more painterly side, I think all those artists still demonstrate the same sort of principle, which is varying the paint application in the darks versus the lights. It's just some vary it to a lesser or greater degree. But it's interesting to see connections between two artists that you might sort of first think are very different, but when you sort of, I think, just get more tuned into to sort of and more sensitive to that world, you kind of see, wait, actually, they're kind of just doing the same thing. It's just a different take on it.
Mm, yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. It'd be amazing to see in person as well, because I can imagine that in person your paintings have a much different presence than they will in a photograph or over a screen. So, um, is that what's your experience been with galleries? Has it been mixed? Or has it always been good?
No, it's been I've had good experiences with galleries. I've had not so good experience with galleries. Overall, though, I've had very good experience with galleries. And I think when I didn't have bad experience, when I did have less good experience with galleries, it was probably largely probably my own fault for mishandling that relationship. Just probably being a little bit younger and maybe a little bit probably a lack of experience sort of thing. But also, it's like you have to find the right gallery for you, and not every gallery is going to be right for everybody. So um, you got to find the right place for you, and it's and the right environment that you feel kind of comfortable in, and where you can still feel like you're able to kind of do what you want. But some galleries want to have more their hands on their artists a little bit more than others, and some are a little more hands off. And uh, um, so I think it's about finding what is right for you. And uh, but I think galleries are a good thing. I've greatly benefited from them. I'm happy that I don't only have to rely on galleries. I like now that it's easier for an artist to reach collectors directly. Thanks to, internet, social media, all that sort of stuff. Galleries used to have a lot more power than they do now. Um, but I think you need to diversify the way you get your work out there. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. So I want to always. I always want to be in galleries. I always want to be able to be in galleries. I always want to be able to sell work directly. Because I think that's really ultimately the best way to make sure you're um, getting as much sales as you can, because galleries have access to people I don't have access to. Um, and that's why they get their commission. Um, so I think it's you try out, you try it out, you see how it goes, and you'll find out sooner or later whether it's a good place for you to be or not. And it's more, there's more to it than just whether or not they sell your paintings. Because you have to, I think it's, but I think I've had mostly just very good experience with galleries, and I really like the galleries I'm in now. I have I feel like I have a good relationship with all of them. I wish I could. I feel bad if anything is wrong with a gallery relationship at this point, is it's me, because I'm probably not able to be as involved with them as I would like to, just getting spread a little thin. Um, but yeah, it's it's ultimately it's a good thing. And whether or not regardless of how everyone feels about the 50% commission, um, that's the industry standard, and you can if you either accept it and do it, or you don't, and then try to go it alone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for anyone out there who is trying to climb the ladder of different tiers of galleries, where is it gone awry for you? Where would you caution other people to not make the same mistakes that can be made with building relationships with galleries?
Um, in the beginning, you got to take whatever you can get. And when I finished studying, I emailed literally like 50 galleries. I emailed like every gallery I could think of, and then I just went into just Googling like fine art galleries in cities, and then then you'll see a list of galleries, and then you just go to one website, see what kind of work they have, and then if you think it's like in line with what you do, you send them an email, and then it's just like I did that with like 50 some galleries and heard back from basically none of them. The ones you did hear back from, it was a no, and then but then you keep doing it, and then eventually someone will say yes, and then you have your foot in the door, and then you come in, you try to come in with prices that aren't too high, but also not too low, so that you can kind of better to err on the lower side, so that it's better to, a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. So it's better to get a sale, get some stuff going, and then eventually you can start to raise your prices a little bit. But I think in the beginning you can't be too picky, and you got to take whatever you can get. Once you kind of demonstrate a certain level of success in the market, then you can get a little more particular about what you want. But I think if you don't want to go into it early on with too much of any sort of demands or like this attitude, like you're going to call any of the shots. You take whatever you can get, and then hopefully later you gain more leverage just through having success and with sales and whatnot. But it's totally you have to be willing to hear a whole lot of no's before you hear a yes, and you have to like be okay with that, and you have to sort of be able to persevere through that and to keep working. I think the biggest thing is just to really focus on making paintings, and just, if you are someone that wants to be a professional artist, the first priority should just be you're making paintings. And if you can show up at your easel every day, or every day that you're able to, and you can kind of consistently produce over a longer term, then things might start happening for you. But it's certainly a long game, where only the people that kind of have the staying power are the ones that I think kind of get anywhere. And it's very easy to kind of go to a school. Well, none of it's easy, but I think what happens a lot is people will go to an art school and they get good skills, but then they're on their own after they finish, and they might hang around for a few years, but they sort of ended up fizzling out and having to get a real job. But I think for me, if I had to say there's one thing that's let me kind of get where I'm at today, wherever that is, it's not being super talented or gifted or any of that. I think I just somehow, for whatever reason, had the ability just to keep showing up every day. And then, like, 10 some plus years later, I can actually say I'm making a career doing this. But
you definitely got the work in,
Yeah, it's totally about, and that's, sorry, it's kind of a cliche, but it's all about, I think, just hard work and perseverance over the long term.
And for people who do have the opportunity to see your work in person, where is it exhibited? Which galleries do you currently work with?
I work with Collins Gallery in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in the States. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, also in the States. It's on the West Coast, more west. Meyer's Gallery, and in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, I exhibit with Galerie Mokum, and yeah, those are my main galleries. I've done random stuff here and there, but those are my main galleries where I'm represented.
And if people aren't able to see your work in person, where online would you like people to go to see your work and to support you?
On Instagram, I am Justin Wood Art with underscores between those words. And my website is justinwoodart.com.
Fantastic. Well, there'll be links in the description of the video and the audio platform of all of the galleries, of your social media. I highly recommend everyone go and check it out because it's incredible work. It's absolutely beautiful. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you, Simon. It was really nice talking to you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.